The country faces millions of euro in fines for failing to cut greenhouse gas emissions. The Environmental Protection Agency has warned Ireland won't meet its target of a 20% reduction by 2020.
The fossil fuel era is over, and countries like Ireland that have been slow to decarbonise need to get with the programme. That was the message from the EPA today.
By 2020, our emissions will only be between 4 and 6% below 2005 levels, as compared to our commitments of 20% below 2005 levels. So there's a compliance element there. We're not complying with our EU requirements, but more importantly, what it's showing to the EPA, and I suppose showing to all of us, is that we're not on a trajectory to a low-carbon economy.
Economic recession kept our greenhouse gas emissions 10 million tonnes below target by 2015. But economic growth is reversing that. By 2020, the EPA says our emissions could be 14 million tonnes above target, and somehow we will have to pay for that.
And that's hundreds of millions that we can't spend building schools or hospitals or other infrastructure or providing services. So even though it's what we might consider a manageable level of cost, it's still a very significant level of cost.
The minister responsible for climate action says the situation is looking stark.
A lot of work needs to be done. We need to start working together. We've already started that process within the department. We're going to have a renewable heat incentive scheme operational this year. We're looking at other incentives to drive energy efficiency.
Ignoring the emissions issue will prove to be very expensive for the Irish economy in the long run, and yet tackling the issue, according to the Minister, will also prove to be expensive and complex in the short to medium term. So either way, it looks like we'll be caught between a rock and a hard place.
Let's stay with that, because we're joined here in studio by Dr. Cara Augustenborg, who is Chairperson of Friends of the Earth and lectures in environmental change at University College Dublin. Thanks very much indeed for talking to us on the programme. Now, when you saw this report from the EPA today, was it what you were expecting, or were you surprised?
Well, 2 years ago, the EPA reported that we would fall short of our EU climate and emission reduction targets by about 50%. And today, what they announced indicates the situation is far worse. So we're looking at maybe achieving our targets by about a quarter. So that's really an appalling result. We're one of only 2 countries that won't achieve our 2020 emissions reduction targets in the EU.
And is it largely accounted for by the recovery in the economy? Just more activity, more cars on the road, more industry, more agriculture? Is that what it's down to?
Well, the recession actually helped us reduce our emissions because economic activity declined, particularly in things like transport. And then because we failed to address these issues in any way, even as the economy started to come back, now what we're seeing is transport emissions are increasing, agricultural emissions are increasing in line with our government's policy to intensify and increase exports. So we've really done nothing to address our obligations, both with our national legislation and with our UN climate commitments.
And are there any measures that can be put in place that at this stage could actually enable us to reach these targets, or is that effectively gone now?
Well, to reach our overall target, which is a low carbon transition that we need to make, which the EPA talked about today, we would have to reduce our emissions by about 5% per year starting now, between now and 2020. And we could do lots of things. We could stop burning peat, for one. It's the dirtiest fossil fuel and it's an incredible carbon sink for us. We could close Money Point coal-fire plant. We could put a price on solar so we could actually purchase solar energy from people. We are missing out on a rooftop revolution right now across the world, as every other country is putting solar panels on their rooftops and we simply don't purchase solar energy from suppliers. So there's a lot we could do. We could invest in solar or in transport. We could invest in sustainable transport and divert money away from roads.
But presumably, I mean, all of that involves costs, and maybe the really big cost here is perhaps the price of that for our economic prosperity, for jobs.
Yeah, I mean, what we know is that if we moved to this low carbon society and a fully renewable energy system, we would create 100,000 jobs in this country. So actually, there's a potential for real economic growth as a result of the low carbon transition. And if we fail to achieve these EU commitments, there are massive fines. So we're looking already at in excess of 600 million euro if we don't meet our 2020 targets, based on the Institute of International Affairs analysis.
But I mean, would it be offset by job losses in other sectors? Maybe, for example, agriculture?
We need to look at doing a just transition. So we need to look at taking the jobs around peat burning and taking the subsidies that we pay for peat burning and actually diverting them to new training in the renewable energy sector. And with agriculture, you know, the price of milk and the price of beef is not great. Farmers are struggling, family farms are struggling. And the low carbon transition is an opportunity for them to diversify into other types of agriculture and potentially feeding into the renewable energy sector too.
The average, I'm told that the average reduction across the EU is 10%, and our target is 20%. At the time, did we accept really an excessive target? I mean, is that part of the reason here?
No,
our target, extra burden?
Our target, along with every other EU country's target, was based on our GDP, which was very high. And Denmark also got a very high target because of their GDP. Our GDP is still one of the highest in the EU, so on the basis of that, the target was fair.
All right, when you hear what Minister Denis Naughton's been saying today, for example, looking at things like more investment in renewable energy, other measures, would you be confident that there's a resolve here to deal with this?
No, they published in March a draft national mitigation plan, which was really not a plan at all. It was more of a discussion paper. The government is legally obliged by the 10th of June to provide a full national mitigation plan on how we will reduce emissions. And so far, we haven't seen any kind of action that would indicate how they will close the gap so that we meet our 2020 and our 2030 targets.
All right, then we'll leave it. Dr. Cara Augustenborg, thank you very much indeed for talking to us.
Thanks, Brian.